When you're prepping for the UPSC exams, you're always looking at that big picture, right? The major global stuff shaping things.
Absolutely.
And a recent World Bank report really throws a critical issue into sharp focus. Their 2025 State of Social Protection report.
Yeah, I saw that one. Pretty sobering numbers.
Sobering is the word. It says nearly 2 billion people in low and middle income countries lack adequate social safety nets.
2 billion. It's hard to even wrap your head around that scale.
Exactly. Just pause on that. Almost 2 billion people without that reliable cushion. So for those of you deep in your UPSC mains prep, this is core stuff.
Definitely. Socioeconomic development, global inequality, it touches on all of it.
And crucially, where India fits in.
Right. That figure really hits home the challenge of building, stable, equitable societies.
So how does the World Bank actually define social protection in this context?
Well, broadly speaking, it's the policies and programs meant to help people, individuals, and families cope with hardship.
Like unemployment, illness,
Right.
that kind of risk.
Exactly. Manage risks like those and ultimately escape poverty. It's that safety net idea.
Okay. And the report uses those World Bank income categories, right, to break down the data.
Yeah, that's important context. You got low-income countries, LACs, then lower middle income, LMICs, that's where India currently sits.
Right.
Then upper middle income, UMICs, and finally high-income countries, HICs.
Yeah.
These really help frame the different economic realities and, well, the varying capacities for social protection globally.
Makes sense. So for you, our listener, diligently working on your UPSC prep, the mission for this deep dive is clear.
Mm-hmm.
We want to really get under the skin of the global state of social protection, but zoom in on India.
Yeah, look at where India stands, the progress, which is vital for current affairs, right?
Yeah.
But also the challenges, the hurdles still there.
And potential strategies moving forward. We're pulling mainly from that World Bank 2025 report, also the ILO's World Social Protection Report for 2024-26.
And some key data from India's Ministry of Labor and Employment, reported by DTE, down to earth.
Got it. Okay, so let's paint that global picture first. What are the big headline findings from the World Bank that listeners really need to grasp?
Well, the first thing is just the sheer size of the coverage gaps. As you said, 1.6 billion in LICs and MICs with no social protection, none at all.
1.6 billion. Wow.
And if you focus on the most vulnerable people in extreme poverty, it gets even worse.
How much worse?
Globally, a staggering 88% of those in extreme poverty lack adequate protection, or any protection in many cases.
88%. That just tells you current systems aren't reaching the people who need them most, doesn't it?
It points to a huge disconnect.
Yeah.
And it's particularly bad, and you might expect, in the lowest income countries and sub-Saharan Africa.
What are the figures there?
We're talking 98% lack of coverage in LICs and 97% in sub-Saharan Africa. It's just astronomical.
Practically everyone.
Pretty much. Even in lower middle income countries, like India's category, over 30% are still without sufficient protection. But here's an interesting point the report makes. While the proportion of unprotected people is highest in LICs in sub-Saharan Africa,
Right.
the largest absolute number is actually in the middle-income countries, about 1.2 billion unprotected people there.
Just because of population size.
Exactly. Larger populations mean the absolute numbers stack up, even if the percentage is lower than in LICs. So sub-Saharan Africa feels it most intensely proportionally, but MICs carry the biggest burden in terms of sheer numbers.
That's a really important distinction. Makes you think about resource allocation and where the biggest need numerically lies. Crucial for that UPSC global development perspective.
For sure. And the implications for inequality are massive.
Now, the report wasn't all bad news, right? It mentions some progress.
Yes, it did acknowledge some forward movement. Between 2010 and 2022, coverage in LICs and MICs did rise, went from 41% up to 51%.
Okay, that sounds positive. 10 percentage points.
On the surface, yes. But, and this is the critical point, the pace of that progress is the problem.
Too slow.
Way too slow. It's nowhere near fast enough to meet SDG target 1.3 by 2030. The one aiming for substantial social protection for all.
Uh-huh. What are the projections looking like then?
Well, they're quite worrying, actually. At the current rate, the World Bank estimates we won't get full coverage just for those in extreme poverty until 2043.
2043, that's more than a decade past the SDG deadline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to reach the poorest 20% of the population, that pushes out even further to 2045.
Goodness, that really highlights a gap between the goals we set and what's actually happening on the ground, doesn't it?
It really does. It underscores this disconnect between, global aspirations and the current political will. the resources being allocated. That urgency for faster reform is definitely a key takeaway for any UPSC analysis.
Definitely. Those timelines are stark. So what's holding things back? What are the big obstacles slowing down progress globally?
Funding is a huge one. Predictably, maybe. The report shows this massive disparity in spending.
Between rich and poor countries.
Yeah. High-income countries spend 5.3 times more of their GEP. That's the total value of goods and services, right?
Right.
And a massive 85.8 times more per person on social protection compared to low-income countries.
85 times more per person. That's incredible.
It is. And if you look just at social assistance, the direct support for the poorest LICs spend only about 0.8% of their GDP. Even lower MACs, it's only around 2%.
So tiny fractions compared to the overall economy.
Exactly. And this difference means HICs can invest in preventative stuff, more comprehensive benefits. LICs are often stuck just reacting to the most extreme poverty.
And where does the money that is spent actually go?
Well, that's another issue. Often, it's heavily weighted towards social insurance programs.
Which mainly cover people in formal jobs, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which means the poor, the vast majority working in the informal economy, they often get left out. The system design itself can exclude the neediest.
So the structure itself builds in inequality. That's a really crucial point about how social protection works or doesn't work.
Absolutely. And then there's this issue the report calls subsidy misalignment.
What's that about?
Basically, huge amounts of money globally, around $7 trillion go into subsidies. Think fossil fuels, agriculture.
Okay.
But often, these subsidies end up benefiting wealthier people more than the vulnerable groups they might supposedly be aimed at.
So money intended for support isn't actually reaching the intended targets efficiently.
Often, yes. It raises big questions about policy priorities. If even some of that misdirected subsidy money was shifted to targeted social protection, the impact could be huge, transformative, potentially.
Really puts the focus not just on how much is spent, but how it's spent, who benefits, okay? The report also mentioned vulnerability to external shocks, climate change, conflicts.
Yes, and that's increasingly critical, isn't it, with everything going on globally?
Absolutely. Relevant for tracking global risks in UPSC prep.
For sure. The report stresses that many systems are just not ready. They're unprepared for the increasing frequency of climate shocks, conflicts, pandemics too.
What are the projections there?
They estimate climate change alone could push another 130 million people into extreme poverty by 2030.
130 million more.
And think about where the extreme poor are concentrated now. About 60% are in fragile and conflict-affected countries, mostly in Africa and Asia.
So the shocks will hit hardest where the protection gaps are already the biggest.
Exactly. It exacerbates the existing vulnerabilities. It just shows how interconnected all these global challenges are: climate, conflict, poverty, lack of social safety nets. We need systems that are resilient, adaptable.
That's a stark global backdrop. Okay, let's pivot to India now. The sources we looked at, including DTE, do highlight some really significant progress here, right?
Yes, absolutely. India's progress on expanded coverage has been quite notable in recent years.
What do the numbers show?
Well, according to the ILO's World Social Protection Report, the 2024-26 edition, India's coverage basically doubled, went from about 24.4% in 2021 to 48.8% in 2024.
Doubled in just 3 years. That's substantial.
It is. And data from India's own Ministry of Labor and Employment, reported via DTE, suggests maybe even higher coverage. They estimate around 65% of the population,
Which is about
roughly 920 million people, covered under at least one social protection scheme, whether that's cash or in-kind benefits like food. A big jump in a fairly short time.
That's a massive number of people being reached, and presumably this connects to India's poverty reduction efforts, a key topic for UPSC.
Oh, definitely. The sources suggest an estimated 24.8 crore, that's 248 million Indians, escaped multidimensional poverty between 2013 and 2023.
And multidimensional considers more than just income, right? Health, education.
Exactly. Living standards, too. Now, social protection is just one piece of that puzzle, obviously, but it's a crucial piece. That safety net really does empower people, helps them improve their situation.
Makes sense. So what are some of the flagship government programs driving this, the kind of schemes our UPSC listeners really need to know?
Right. There are several key ones. Ayushman Bharat, the health scheme, ADPMJAY.
The big health insurance one.
Yeah, offering coverage up to 5 lakh rupees per family. It's benefiting over, 399 million people now? Almost 40 crore.
Huge reach. What else?
Then there's the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, PMGKAY, the food security program.
One of the biggest in the world, isn't it?
It really is. As of late 2024, providing free food grains to over 80 crore people, 806 million. Just massive scale.
Incredible numbers.
And the eShram portal is another important one, that national database for unorganized workers.
Trying to bring the informal sector into the fold.
Exactly. Over 30 crore registrations, 306 million. And significantly more than half, about 53–54%, are women. So it's playing a role in inclusive coverage for a group that's often hard to reach.
That's a positive sign for inclusion. Any others to highlight?
The Atal Pension Yojana, APY, aimed at boosting retirement security, again, especially for informal sector workers. Around 7.25 crore enrollments there, 72.5 million.
So these are definitely concrete government actions broadening that social protection umbrella.
They represent a significant effort, yes.
But, okay, we know it's rarely straightforward. What are the major challenges still facing India's system? That gap between policy and, effective implementation on the ground, that's crucial analysis for UPSC.
You're absolutely right. Implementation is often where things get tricky. One big challenge mentioned is the effectiveness of specific welfare boards.
How so?
Well, the Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, did a report in 2023. It found over 70,000 crore rupees in welfare cess collected for construction workers was just sitting there, unutilized.
70,000 crore, just unspent.
Unspent. It points to serious implementation gaps, maybe bureaucratic inertia, maybe lack of awareness among the workers themselves. Who knows? But the money isn't reaching the people it's meant for.
That's a huge amount. Raises serious questions about accountability, doesn't it? And the actual delivery mechanisms.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Just having the funds isn't enough. Another major constraint is, well, overall funding capacity compared globally.
We touched on the global disparities earlier. How does India compare?
While spending has gone up, it's still around 5% of GDP, if you exclude health spending. The global average, according to that ILO report, is closer to 13%.
So significantly lower than the global average.
Yeah, and that financial limit naturally impacts how comprehensive the support can be, the scale of it.
Okay. What about other hurdles? Technology, administration?
Both. Technology like the eShram portal has huge potential, right, for bringing people in.
Yeah.
But you run into issues like low awareness, especially in rural areas. And the digital divide, not everyone has reliable internet access.
So adoption is patchy.
It seems so. The fact that about 31 crore workers are registered on eShram out of an estimated informal workforce of over 38 crore shows there's still a gap. Good progress, but a gap remains.
So technology helps, but ensuring access and awareness is still key.
Definitely. Then there's the international standards aspect. India hasn't ratified some key ILO conventions.
Like which one?
The main one is the Social Security Minimum Standards Convention, number 1 or 2, from 1952. Ratifying it would signal a stronger commitment to universal minimum standards, potentially driving more reforms.
Interesting point. And administratively, is the system fragmented?
Very much so. You've got numerous schemes run by the central government, numerous others by state governments. This lack of convergence, you could call it,
Leads to problems.
yeah, it can lead to duplication, inefficiencies, people falling through the cracks because they don't quite fit one scheme or another. Exclusion.
And data. Is there a unified system?
That's another big challenge. The lack of a unified national database makes targeted delivery really difficult. Hard to track who's getting what, avoid duplication.
I see.
And the system struggles to keep up with changes, like the rise of gig and platform workers. The Code on Social Security from 2020 aimed to help universalize things. But the implementation guidelines aren't fully clear yet, and the definitions of gig worker and platform worker are still a bit vague, creating uncertainty for policy for these newer work forms.
So better coordination, integrated data, clearer definitions all seem pretty essential moving forward.
Absolutely crucial. And one more really big one. Demographics.
India's aging population.
Exactly. It's going to put huge pressure on pensions and healthcare down the line. Think about the support ratio, the number of working-age people per elderly person.
How has that changed?
It's dropped from about 14 workers per senior in 1997 to around 10 now. And the projections, by 2050, it could be down to 4.6. By 2100, maybe even below 2.
Wow. So fewer workers supporting more elderly people.
Yes. And senior share of consumption is expected to nearly double.
Hmm.
Without really proactive reforms now, the current systems might just not be adequate long term.
Those demographic figures really hammer home the need for forward planning, don't they? Making the system sustainable. Okay, so given all these challenges, globally and in India, what are the strategies? What can be done to expand coverage effectively? This is prime UPSC policy recommendation territory.
Okay, for India specifically, a few things stand out. One is adopting minimum guarantees, aligning with that ILO Convention 102 idea.
For things like income, health, pensions.
Yeah, basic income security, healthcare access, maternity benefits, disability support, pensions, setting a floor. Another big one is developing that unified national social registry.
Bringing together Aadhaar, eShram, state data.
Exactly. To improve targeting, cut down on waste, make it all more efficient, then gradually increasing spending towards maybe 8–10% of GDP.
With a focus on results.
Yes, prioritizing outcome-based financing, making sure the money achieves what it's supposed to, and finally, using existing networks better.
Like the common service centers.
Precisely. Using CSCs, maybe leveraging tech like Bihashashini for regional language support to boost awareness and help people enroll, especially in harder-to-reach areas.
Those sound like practical India-focused steps. What about the bigger picture? Global strategies, especially for other LICs and LMICs.
Globally, things like expanding universal basic income trials, targeted food subsidies, cash transfers, both conditional and unconditional. These can provide vital safety nets.
Direct support.
Yeah. And reforming those regressive subsidies we talked about, the ones helping the rich and redirecting that money to inclusive programs, that's huge potential.
Freeing up resources.
Exactly. Investing in systems that are climate resilient, shock responsive, that means better digital infrastructure, social registries, direct benefit transfer mechanisms ready for crises.
Building resilience.
And addressing the whole life cycle of risks.
Yeah.
Old age, unemployment, disability with proper insurance and assistance programs. And tying it all back to that SDG 1.3 goal, these aren't just welfare, they're fundamental development strategies.
Right. So let's try and sum up. The World Bank shows major global gaps in social protection, funding shortfalls, leaving many vulnerable. India. Impressive strides in coverage, key initiatives launch.
Yeah, significant progress.
But still grappling with big challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Unspent funds, fiscal limits, admin tangles, and those looming demographic shifts.
Hurdles remain, absolutely.
The strategies we discussed for India and globally, they offer pathways towards hopefully more resilient, fairer societies. And for you, our listener, prepping for UPSC, understanding these dynamics is just vital.
It connects directly to poverty, inequality, governance, social justice, all core syllabus areas for mains and relevant for prelims too.
Definitely.
And maybe a final thought to leave people with. Considering how fast technology is changing, the nature of work evolving, gig economy, automation, how do social protection systems need to fundamentally change in the coming decades?
To stay relevant,
Yeah.
to remain effective for everyone.
Exactly. That's a huge question for the future and something really worth mulling over as you continue your UPSC journey.
Great point. So for all of you dedicated UPSC aspirants, if you found this deep dive useful for your daily current affairs prep for mains, maybe got some insights for prelims too, please do hit that like button and subscribe for more analyses like this.
And drop us a comment below. Any further questions or other topics you'd like us to tackle, let us know.
Absolutely. And remember, a key source for today's discussion, particularly the India data points, was DTE Down to Earth. Thanks for tuning in.